you. We've been getting a lot of online comment about when did this really begin? Is this something that's new or something that has been a long time in coming? And I'd like to have John Fund add some context to that.
Certainly. Not only is this the birthday of Martin Luther King, but it's the 22nd anniversary of Ronald Reagan's farewell address. And Reagan began his speech by saying there was a great tradition of presidents giving warnings. We all remember Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech. And Reagan said, I have one warning for the American people, and that is that we're losing touch with our history, which means we're losing touch with what it means to be an American. This is what he said 22 years ago this week. He said that we are not doing a good enough job teaching our children what America is and what it represents. Younger parents aren't sure that an unambivalent appreciation of America is the right thing to teach modern children. And as for those who create the popular culture, well-grounded patriotism is no longer the style. Our spirit is back, he said, but we haven't reinstitutionalized it. We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise. Freedom is special and rare. It's fragile and it needs protection. And then he said, we have got to get back to teaching history based not on what's in fashion, but what's important. And I think that's something we also have to recognize. We are probably spending as many minutes in something called civics in our schools as we did in the past, in most schools. But what kind of history are we teaching? Look, I'm very glad that the contributions of groups that have previously been neglected or marginalized in American life are now part of our story, and much more part of our story. But just as we're neglecting, as Diane Ravitch said, a lot of these lessons of democracy, we're also neglecting parts of our history, what makes it work. And I believe that we need to get back to the basics in history as we're also getting back to the basics in reading and writing. And also our leaders have a role in this. I, of course, am worried about the influence of money in politics. But let's put it into perspective. All of the money we spent in politics in 2010 was less than what Americans buy in yogurt every year. So there's something deeper than just the influence of money in politics. There's also, I think, a fear of our leaders to talk straight to the American people. Look at the popularity in a very blue state of Governor Chris Christie. Some people call him a bully. He says he's a straight shooter. What he did say yesterday on television was that we have become so politically correct that our leaders now constantly worry about how not to answer questions or how to confuse the questions. And he said the public has become, quote, fogged over, unquote, and they don't clearly understand what needs to be done. They don't understand the need for sacrifice. They don't understand the need for shared sacrifice. They don't understand the need for us to come together as a people. I believe we have an obligation on two fronts. Our leaders must speak more clearly and straight with us and not be worried about offending some people in doing so. And we individually, and this is how Reagan ended, we individually at dinner tables have to have conversations with our children and engage our children in what our country is all about and where our future is going.
Hey, Bob, would you like to follow up?
I'd like to associate myself with my colleagues here, but I'd like to, on your ending point about families and sitting at home, a few years ago I was chair of the Congressional Clearinghouse on the Future, and I learned that our families are fractured. We live in a society where the nuclear family that we all remember from the 50s and 60s has really disappeared. And so in those homes where there's still a nightly meal, where there's still an opportunity for families to talk together, we ought to increase our understanding of what's happening. Bill Moyers said something interesting in a book called Moyers on Democracy. He said, the simple fact is that extremes of wealth and poverty undermine democracy. Poorly educated kids and illiterate adults get left out of democracy. The questioner was asking, when did all this start? My guess is that in every generation of history, there's a need to remind ourselves not to forget our history, to learn from our past, to make sure that we're committed to quality education. And quality education in these times does not just mean children in the classroom. as has been said before, it means across all of our generations, including adults and senior adults who need to be educated. And I like Governor Romer's comment about how we have to mentor as adults better language, better behavior, better civic speech. We need to teach our politicians that they have to dialogue together as opposed to bang ideas together, as we've seen over the last couple of years. And hate speech just simply has to end. We've got to find a way to talk more collaboratively with and about each other.
Thank you. Anyone in the San Diego? It looks like Richard, you have some remarks?
Rick Schenkman would like to say something first.
So I'm a historian, and I studied this to try to figure out how do we account for this change. Consider this fact. In 1940, 6 in 10 Americans had not gone past the 8th grade. A majority had not gone past the 8th grade. Today, most Americans have attended college. They haven't graduated, but they have at least attended community college or university. That leaves us with a paradox. How is it possible that we're more schooled and yet we know less about politics and government than our parents and grandparents? And we know this for a fact from these studies that I cited in my earlier comments. So how does that happen? Well, there are two large forces that have changed our society, and there are lots of other things which the speakers have already touched on, but I think we ought to face these two large forces. One is television. It has dumbed down our democracy because it places a high value on entertainment. You cannot help as a human being when you watch a politician on a television set, either in a presidential debate or giving a speech, to react as a theater goer does, where what you wind up becoming preoccupied with is the performance. Nobody ever voted against William Howard Taft because he was fat or Abraham Lincoln because he was thin. They were concerned with more substantive questions. Not that I want to claim that it was a golden age before. It wasn't. There was all kinds of hokum and hooey in American politics. But we've become a less serious people because of television. And I was in the television business for 25 years, and I can tell you, when you're producing a newscast at night and you're thinking, what's going to be the story that's going to lead this newscast, you're not thinking it's going to be, how am I going to teach a civics lesson today? It's going to be what was the fire of the day or a wreck or some human interest story that's going to grab people, because you know that's a ratings winner. So that's one of the problems. The other problem is that people 50 years ago took their cues from party bosses and labor bosses. And today they're largely on their own. Now, I don't want to go back to a period where party bosses and labor bosses are telling us how to vote and how to think. But there was a virtue to that old system. There was more seriousness to it. When a labor leader would tell his labor union members, vote for this guy because he's going to raise your wages, he's going to improve your living conditions, that was a more substantive content to our politics than what we have today. When people are on their own and they are cut off from political party leaders, then really, on what basis are they making their judgments? They're making their judgments on the basis of 30-second spot commercials. That's where most people learn most of what they know. The content of what they know about where their politicians stand on issues is from those dopey 30-second commercials. That is a sorry comment on our democracy.